One of the most harrowing events in sailing history has to be undoubtedly the 1979 Fastnet race. A sudden and ferocious storm turned the prestigious race into a tragedy. It claimed 19 lives and caused widespread devastation across the fleet. In the conversation today, we're going to explore how this disaster has reshaped the world of sailing, leading to sweeping changes in safety regulations and the development of modern safety equipment. We're going to learn about the weather, we're going to learn about the rescues, we're going to learn about the infrastructure that's now in place to mitigate, but most importantly, we're going to hear a first-hand experience as well. So, welcome. I'm going to start. This Fastnet race happens every 2 years. We're actually in 2025 celebrating 100 years of the race. In 1925, only 7 boats crossed that start line for that first race that has built to be one of the biggest races in the world. Now, Simon Rao, meteorologist, works with a British sailing team. You look at weather all around the world. Take us back to 1979 and set the scene of what that Fastnet weather forecast was like on the day they set off.
Thanks very much, Dee. Well, it is a fascinating meteorological situation there, and one which obviously changed very quickly and a little unexpectedly. I went back to the archives in the Met Office and looked at the analysis charts and the forecast for the couple of days beforehand. And 2 days before, on the 12th, everything was looking okay. There was a small low a long way away in the western half of the Atlantic. There was a larger one well up to the north, which was pretty much gone at that point. And the forecast was for this low in the West Atlantic to move eastwards and go over Northwest Ireland and up past Scotland, which is fairly standard behaviour for a North Atlantic low. On the 13th, the low was just on the edge of the European forecast chart. It wasn't particularly deep. It was at 0600 on the 13th. The central pressure was 1004 millibars, and the forecast for that day, for the next 24 hours, says during the next 24 hours, a depression in mid-Atlantic is expected to deepen and move towards Northwest Ireland, which was the key to the actual more specific forecast for the race area. With a low coming across from the mid-Atlantic going towards Northwest Ireland, basically the island of Ireland would be really effectively in the way, in between the strongest weather and where the fleet was going to be. So while strong conditions were expected, well, it is the Fastnet race. It's really easy. It certainly wasn't expected to be as quickly changing and as quickly developing as it was. The reason for that will become sort of apparent, but it was the actual path of the low changed not very much in meteorological terms, but very significantly in terms of what the sailors experienced over the following 24 hours.
So the dock chat that morning or the day before would have been, we're going to get a bit of a pasting, but it's the Fastnet race. The Irish Sea is going to test us.
I would have thought so, yes. It probably would have been slightly more blunt than that at times, but yes, so that would have been roughly it. I think typical Fastnet conditions, we're going to have great stories to tell in the pub afterwards. Not quite.
Yeah, and Francis Reincke joins us now. Francis, you were sailing this race, and one of the unique things about the Fastnet race is it brings professional sailors and Corinthian sailors together on the same racetrack. Tell us about your boat and your crew and how you felt the day before the start.
Oh, goodness. Yeah, I was 21 at the time, and the crew were a complete mishmash of people. We hadn't even met until the day of the race, a lot of them. My brother was on board. He was 19. There were 8 of us in a 36-foot boat. She was called Autonomy. She was brand new, built that year, had a shakedown cruise down to Spain. So we hoped that all the sort of niggles had been ironed out. We were later to find out that they weren't. But anyway, we were a mixture of really big ocean racers and people like me and my brother who were cruisers. My brother and I were basically born sailing and born on boats. And, you know, we'd done the Channel, we'd done the North Sea, we'd done Scotland. We'd been all over the place on boats. So we knew what we were doing. We just never raced before. So this was quite trepidatious, I suppose is the word. And also, I was the only girl on board. There were 8 of us.
Rest assured, some things haven't changed that much in sailing. It's changing slowly, but there's quite a few boats where there's only one woman on board.
Yeah, yeah. The skipper was an amazing chap. I'd never met him before. I also, the most extraordinary thing was, I think the entire crew, we were all under the age of 30, I would guess. I didn't really ask anybody's age, but anyway, the skipper, his name was Simon Ski, and his day job, when he wasn't sailing, was lassoing icebergs to drag them away from oil rigs. And I never knew that was a job, but I thought we were in pretty safe hands. He knew what he was doing on the sea.
And start day for you, quite safe in the Solent, leaving Cowes?
Yes, quite safe. My parents live in Cowes. They were sort of waving goodbye, and off we went. And it was very exciting coming down the Solent. And then, of course, we were getting into watch mode and eating stew, that sort of thing. And we, thundered down to the West Country like a train. I mean, it was all going very well. And I do remember the forecast at 6 o'clock on the Monday night, and it was sort of not too bad, really. It wasn't till the midnight forecast that we suddenly went, oh, sugar, we're in trouble.
Yeah, and Simon, what was that midnight forecast like? What was the transition?
Yeah, the really big difference there was the actual path of the low. There's I think two really important features of this low. First of all, it deepened very rapidly, more so than was expected, and secondly, its path was a little bit further south. So rather than going up the west coast of Ireland, it went up the east coast. So the fleet was then exposed to the full force of this rapidly deepening low. So I haven't managed to get the exact forecast that was issued then, but I would imagine that the probable force 6s to force 7s would have gone up to force 8s to 10s in the shipping forecast over a very short period of time.
And Francis, at what point did you start hearing the radio calls and the conditions changing, and what was it like on board as you kind of entered into these horrendous conditions?
Well, after the midnight forecast, which was, as you said, Simon, was forecasting 8 to 10, we'd rounded Land's End at midday on the Monday, and we were now sort of heading up in the Irish Sea. And so by midnight, it was all getting fairly hairy, and we did take down a lot of sail, but not all of it. It was still okay, but we started being, the waves were really breaking over the boat, and they were just coming from every direction. They weren't sort of, a continuous swell. It was every direction. And we were filling up with water. Unbeknownst to us, the cockpit lockers were draining into the bilge and not out. And we were getting lower and lower and lower in the water, but we're down, I think we were down now to a very small storm jib. Everything else was down. And this was the biggest problem was that, yes, we could hear other people on the radio, but, it's not like today. You didn't have masses of chat. It was mostly just, as far as I don't really remember, but there must have been just mayday calls and that sort of thing going on. But we were a bit more concerned about how low we were in the water. And at 7:10 in the morning, we did what is now been known as a B2. We were knocked down and did a full 180, not a 360. Hence the term B2 was in the questionnaire after the Fastnet was over and what happened to you. Question B2 was, did you do a full 360 or a 180? And we did a 180. So we came up the same way as we'd gone over.
Wow. And in part of that kind of instigated the biggest rescue we've seen in a long time. And one of the mechanics for the RNLI was Mark Gannon from Court McSherry. And you were on that famous call out in 1979. Mark, what do you remember when the call came in, and how was the atmosphere given the conditions you were about to go out into?
Well, my fastest experience started at about 2 o'clock in the morning when I was woken up with the station mechanic was inside my bedroom saying, there's a shout, come on, quick, get out of bed. Because the phones were down And well, that happened actually quite a lot around country areas that time anyway. But they were down because of the wind, I would imagine, or some other reason. But anyway, so we went down to the station, and it was blowing very, very hard at the time. The crew got assembled, and we headed out in our relief Watson, the Sir Samuel Kelly, and yeah, going out the harbour over the bar. It was very, very shallow. We have what they call a bar in Corpmancherry harbour, which at low tide the datum is only about 1.4, 1.5 metres. So if you've got a strong southerly swell, you get quite a pasting going over the bar, you know. But going out, look, you know, these nights you go out in a lifeboat and the lifeboat's in good condition and you know it's well maintained. You don't really think of the you know, is it safe or is it, you know, you just go and do your job really, you know.
I can't even imagine how relaxed, how humble you are talking about the conditions you're going out into. So you're hearing these mayday calls. How many of you are on the boat, and what was your first view of what you had to be part of?
Yeah. We had a full crew that night. Sammy Murns was coxswain and I was mechanic. And as we went out now, the boat was on its end a good few times now. The conditions were quite severe, and we're getting all kind of positions from the Coast Guard. A lot of the boats, there were so many boats in trouble. We were getting kind of positions of 4 or 5 different vessels. So we ended up actually about 40 miles south of the Galley Head, and we managed to find a yacht called the Cassetet, who had lost its rudder, and we proceeded then to tow the Cassetet back to Corpmancherry harbour. But there was several boats around us, but I'd say very hard to pinpoint their positions. Like we found the Cassetet, we could see them at one stage, and you know, just the tip of their mast, the swell was so high. So we actually asked them to fire flares to pinpoint their position, you know.
So it was super hard to find the boats and multiple casualties. How do you kind of triage who you're going to go to, or is it just who you get to first?
It was exactly who we got to first, and for instance, the Cassetet had a rudder loss, but she was still floating. So, of course, if there was another vessel that was, you know, that was in the danger of sinking, we'd have gone to that vessel first. But the Cassetet was the one that we went to that time, yeah.
And for you as a crew, you know, how many hours were you out there in the process of the whole disaster in '79?
We were out for 22 hours, but the most amazing thing about the whole Fastnet disaster was we didn't realise the full extent of it. We didn't know that there was 17 or 18 people. I think what was the death toll at the end?
19.
19. We didn't realise there were so many deaths. So we came back to the pier in Corpmancherry after being at sea for 22 hours, and I couldn't get over the crowds on the pier. There must have been about 300-400 people on the pier in Corkmac. Now Corkmac is it is summertime, but there's only 500 people living in the village. Well, actually, that time there's only about 250 back in '79. So we were amazed at all the crowds on the pier, and we're saying, "Geez, what's going on here?" You know. And then, of course, we got the full story about how all the sailors had drowned, and there were so many people missing, and it was, you know, horrendous, really.
And did your flank stations also get involved? So you had like stories to share?
Oh, they did. Baltimore were out, and Dunmorrees were out as well. Yeah, they were all out for long calls as well. And of course, when we came back in, we made the boat ready, and we were ready to go again if we were called. You know.
Yeah, those unsung heroes. Francis, you ended up getting rescued. What do you remember by it?
It took some time, but Dunmore East were our saviours. The St. Patrick from Dunmore East. What was happening after we were knocked down and 2 people went over the side, we got them back on board. We then obviously took down all the sails. Well, we only had the storm jib up, but took that down because the rigging had all stretched. So everything was a bit of a mess, really. And then we streamed warps behind us to try and slow us down, but one of them got jammed in the rudder, so now we couldn't steer either. But we had managed to get a pan message out, not a mayday, before we went over. So somebody somewhere must have picked that up. But we were 8 hours just being blown east, northeast, across the Irish Sea, waiting for and just hoping somebody would see us. An aeroplane, we later discovered, did see us, and we'd managed to set up a very flare, but not quite sure how Dunmore East Lifeboat found us, or maybe they just did. I don't know, but they suddenly appeared out of the murk at about 5 o'clock in the evening, and there was a huge shout, "They're here, they're here." Most of us just burst into tears. I rushed down below, and to the two guys who was lying on their bunks down below, and I said, "The lifeboats are here, come up, come up." And one of them just turned to me and he said, "Oh, I've seen one at the boat show. I don't need to get out of my bunk." So anyway, we were then towed in, and we arrived in Dunmore East in the early hours of Wednesday morning, having been towed for about 8 or 9 hours. To this, as you were saying, Mark, all the crowds were out. The yacht club at Dunmore East was completely full of people. It was two or three in the morning. There were ambulances. The whole town came out to say hello and greet us, and it was the most amazing welcome. We obviously couldn't live on our boat for a few days, and families took my brother and I in, and all the crew. We were all given beds in everybody's houses. And I can't tell you, we had clean clothes, we had everything we could possibly want. It was the best welcome ever.
Not the one you envisaged when you started your Fastnet race?
No.
Now, Richard Falk, you're the Director of Training and Qualifications at the RYA, and you're listening to this story of 79, turning up to a boat that you don't know, with a team you don't know, about to set off on the Fastnet race. It just must be making you so proud of how far the sport's come. But this disaster was instrumental in a lot of things that happened. Can you kind of tell us the lessons learned, really, or, your reaction to hearing this?
Yeah, thanks, Dee. I started my sailing experience, I guess, not long after that in Australia, and it was very much that same fairly laissez-faire sort of attitude of, should be right, mate, very relaxed, and often substituting crew at the last minute if someone couldn't make it. So I absolutely, understand that picture that Francis painted. But one of the positive things that comes out of any incident, and the 79 Fastnet, and after it the 98 Hobart, one of the only positive, if you like, that comes out of these things are the lessons learned and the changes that they drive. And I guess for me, the really positive thing is that that disaster of 1979, when the 98 Hobart happened, which was actually larger waves, stronger winds, not that this is a competition at all, but because of the lessons that had been learned in the 79 Fastnet, because of the inquiry report that was conducted, because of the recommendations that were made, and because of the changes that were implemented, the loss of life was significantly less in 98 Hobart, despite even more extreme conditions. So I suppose that's a salutary lesson about the good that can come from it. So in terms of the specifics, following the 79 event, there was specific training developed, particularly around the areas of sea survival. Formalised courses were created. They were implemented not only in the UK, but ultimately internationally as well. The carriage of safety equipment evolved. It was more stringently enforced. Inspections of vessels prior to race starts, familiarity with heavy weather, equipment that's used in heavy weather, enforcement of carriage of charts for ports of refuge and things like that, which were not necessarily the case previously. And I guess, as well as the things that were mandated, there have been many other significant developments since then, and they include things like, great improvements in communication, digital selective calling, VHF radios, carriage of EPIRBs, personal locator beacons, and pinpoint accuracy for vessels and people that are in distress. The evolving of standards of safety tethers, of life rafts that have increased drastically during that time. Much more effective education around interpreting forecasts, and in particular what those weather forecasts mean. So an example would be that, back in the day when people heard a forecast, they thought that wind strength that was talked about was the wind strength they were going to experience. What they didn't necessarily understand was that was the mean wind strength, and not understanding that gusts could be up to, Simon, correct me if I'm wrong, 40% more, and that sort of thing. Yep. Was in the realms of the meteorologist, but wasn't well understood by your average yachts person. So the sharing. I'm
just going to come in there, Richard.
Yeah.
Let me just go to Simon on that. Back then, 79 Fastnet forecast was the shipping forecast, right? After the Arches on Radio 4.
Absolutely.
We've come on in leaps and bounds now, and people are downloading grid files. I mean, talk to us about the probably the detail and the accuracy that's improved so much.
Yeah, the weather forecasting has come on hugely since then, and it continues to evolve today. And I guess for if you look at the type of people who sail the Fastnet, which is pretty much the same now as then, just there's a little bit, you have to jump through several more hoops, and as Rich has just said, in a good way, to actually take part in the race. People have way more access to weather now, which is both a good thing. It's mostly a good thing, but occasionally it's a bit of a bad thing. The way that weather forecasts are made is you have basically a computer generated model of the atmosphere and the sea state. The higher the resolution, the more accurately you feel you can represent your own conditions wherever they may be. And back in '79, there was very much a balance between human forecasters and the computer models, and this still is today. But back then there would have been a far lower resolution to what was actually being done. So the shipping forecast was actually a pretty good representation of not quite the most detailed forecast you could get, but the most detailed forecast that you could get as a member of the general public. So yeah, the shipping forecast coming out on VHF every 4 to 6 hours, depending where you are, would have been the main source of weather forecast. Nowadays, you pick up your phone and you've got everything on here, which does lead to the situation where you can basically choose the forecast that suits your needs best, which is not the way to do it.
I have been guilty of that. I pick one that I like.
Yeah, you can get easily for the Fastnet route, you can pick up 7 or 8 different models, all of which are mostly reputable. In the process of a 5-minute trundle through your phone, which do you take? I'm still a firm believer that, for example, every day that I do a weather forecast, if I'm actually at the location, I'll go outside and look at the sky. I think it's a good way to start. And if I'm doing a forecast for somewhere else, I'll ask them to send me a photo before I start doing my things. Looking out the window is the important thing, and understanding the bigger picture of weather is really, really crucial. Going back to the 1979 Fastnet, it's the big picture that changed when that low went from going up the west coast of Ireland, going up the east coast of Ireland, and that wouldn't have been picked up before the boats left the dock. And even today, even if you were monitoring it almost continuously, you'd still be halfway down the channel before that became obvious.
And back then, I mean, as you say, no internet, no digital media. You're relying on a VHF. That communication loop is almost a delay. Everything happens slow time, I guess, for the participants, for the RNLI coming to rescue, coordinating such a large rescue. Logistically, that's quite hard.
Yeah, very much so. There's a much greater reliance on on your own physical observations. I mean, the great thing is that I would imagine, actually, Francis, can you remember if you had a barometer on board?
Yes, we did.
Excellent. Did you tap it? I hope not.
We actually had a barograph, and I have actually still got the piece of paper, where it was on, and it literally just plummeted.
Fantastic. It was one of the things which I found about this system was that, sorry, excuse my meteorological enthusiasm. You probably didn't say the words fantastic when you saw it, but the central pressure of this low dropped by 20 millibars in 12 hours, which is phenomenal. It really is. No wonder everything went south in such a big way. But the point that I'm very badly making here is that I think back then, because you didn't have access to, as Dee says, immediate ongoing forecast, I suspect that you probably spent an awful lot more time actually observing your conditions and trying to think about what they meant, which is potentially being lost a little bit in this more data-driven age where you can just look at your phone to see the weather rather than looking outside.
Dee, can I just jump in with a comment then? Because something that Simon said, I think, is well worth emphasising, and that is that whilst all the positive developments in the digital world, particularly in the areas of meteorology, fantastic, more information, more accurate information available than ever before. Simon's absolutely right in that what we are seeing in terms of habits is a reduction in people's understanding of the underpinning knowledge. Because this information is so freely available, there's much more of a tendency for people to weather shop around for what they like the look of, and B, to believe it to an inappropriately fine level of detail, not necessarily to challenge or to think, what if this happens, or what if it's 20% more? So that sort of level of complacency is something we are seeing creep in.
Yeah, that is so true as well, because understanding why something's forecast is just as important, especially if you're trying to avoid the scary stuff. Mark, 50 years you've served in the RNLI. That's a lot of Fastnet races. From that 79 disaster, is it something the RNLI think, oh God, we're in that year where the Fastnet race happens again? Or have you seen more confidence because you're like, oh no, they're much more prepared, or the safety is in place and there's a more joined up approach?
The safety measures that were introduced after the 79 Fastnet race really, it improved safety all through the yachting world, really. I think the most important thing to come out of it was that your best life raft is your own boat. Yeah, that was, I think, the main thing to come out of the race, and the most important thing to come out. So you don't leave your vessel unless it's gone, and get into one of these life rafts. Nowadays all the boats have EPIRBs, you got personal look heater beacons. VHF, by the way, in 79 wasn't great. Like we were still using the MF and talking to Milford Haven Coast Guard. So we're off the Irish coast talking to an English Coast Guard station. That was the only communication we had. Now, we did have VHF coverage then between the yacht and the lifeboat, but that's only coverage maybe 15, 20 miles, at max, really. So communication.
And that's for those with their mast still in the air.
Yeah, and communication is a big thing that's changed, But there was also things that came out of the Fastnet, like what they call it, hydrostatic
releases.
Shock. When they were, there was some helicopter winchmen were actually talking to casualties in the water, and they were saying, yeah, we're okay, whatever. And by the time they got them into the helicopter, they were dead, from this rush of cold water right into their body core, and things like that. Really important stuff that they all use double straps now. Even if we're taking somebody from the water to the lifeboat now, we use a double strap, and things like that have probably saved countless lives in the last 50 years.
So that's really interesting. The lessons learned weren't just for the sailing community. Actually, the rescue services learned a lot from the incident as well.
Absolutely, yeah. And as I say, like, your own boat is your best life raft. There was cases where people had died trying to get into life rafts, and they'd been washed out of life rafts and their boats. were found up on the coast a couple of days later. You know, that's very, very sad. You know, for the families. You know.
Absolutely. And Richard, part of the preparation for a race, because the Fastnet race is on our home waters, it's in our backyard, but people underestimate that moment you leave Land's End and you cross the Irish Sea. You're like, oh, I'm just going to the Fastnet Rock. But that Irish Sea, there's no protection from the whole Atlantic Ocean coming at you. But the training and the miles you have to put in before you go on this race has changed as well. It's like you've got to be training as a team so you're well versed.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Dee. The crew are now required to have completed a certain number of passages together as a crew. In most cases, those have happened on the boat, so they're more familiar with the boat. They're more familiar with each other. It encourages things like, the practicing of man overboard maneuvers, so that when things go wrong, there's not that mad scramble of, where did we put this, or what procedure are we going to use for that? They've drilled those things. And whilst they may not necessarily get it absolutely right every time, they're not trying to think of a solution to a problem for the first time in the heat of the moment. I think the point that Mark made is absolutely probably the key that came from the learnings from Fastnet, and that is that whole concept of staying with your boat as long as it's absolutely feasible to do so. There were 19 boats abandoned in the 79 Fastnet. In the 98 Sydney to Hobart, after the very wide broadcasting of lessons learned and messages, there were only a handful of boats that were abandoned, and those boats actually sank. So, when I say handfuls, it's twos, threes. And I think that is the key difference between, the loss of life in 79. We then see the proliferation of all that messaging, educating people, sharing that knowledge, and 19 years later, the loss of life in another potentially mass casualty event, and actually the loss of life was greatly reduced. So that, I think, from a real tragedy, some fantastic lessons have been able to be passed on to future generations of sailors.
And I think 2 years ago, we look at the Fastnet start, it was storm force conditions, and there's a massive caveat now of it is your decision to race. But I think within the first 24 hours, we saw over 100 competitors withdraw or retire from the race. There's a big onus on the owner or the skipper, isn't there, Richard, now?
There is. It's a change in mindset. I think people have become a little bit more accepting of the fact that the race and starting and finishing it is not the be all and end all. And I think it is, that education of understanding not only your boat's limitations, but your crew's limitations as well. And there is more of a willingness for people to say, no, this is not wise, this is not sensible. We're going to, we're not going to start, or we are going to retire. And similarly, we've seen race events, not just Fastnet, but other events internationally where starts have been delayed, in recent years because of those really extreme forecasts, and sensibly organisers have made the decision in some cases themselves to delay those or postpone those starts for good reason.
And Simon, as we go along the coast, there's lots of ports of refuge, but that moment you pass the Scillies, you've committed to the Irish Sea. And I'm just wondering, was there anything that was missed by sailors or by anybody in 79 when those conditions changed, or was it they'd gone past the point of no return?
Well, there's never really the complete point of no return. As Francis said, they were pushed northeast by the winds coming in. So I guess if in terms of ports of refuge, just basically going downwind, until conditions ease would probably be this. I think what potentially really did contribute to the sudden overwhelming of the fleet was the sudden change in sea state, as well as the change in wind strength and direction. Looking at the synoptic charts, they would have had a pretty strong southeasterly, probably force 7 gusting 8, then a very strong southwesterly for up to force 10, then swinging around to northwesterly. I suspect force 10 gusting 11 or 12. And of course, because everything's in such a small geographic area, that first of all kicks up the sea state from the south. Then you have another wave train coming in from the southwest, and then a third one, potentially slightly bigger, from the northwest. So they really were. This phrase is used a lot, but it is probably applicable here. They really were in a bit of a washing machine in terms of sea state. So at that point, having a port of refuge is kind of immaterial because you can't really go anywhere except where the conditions take you.
And that's something you said, Francis. You remembered the sea state being the most difficult thing.
Yes, it was absolutely extraordinary. It was coming from every different direction. And,
port of refuge is an option.
I've never seen anything like it. And somebody said it's because it's slightly shallower, from obviously not from the Atlantic, but so Atlantic waves coming in and then hitting a shallower Irish Sea, I suppose. I don't know whether that makes any difference.
It certainly doesn't help. Put it that way. These conditions, if you'd had them right out in the middle of the Atlantic, it still would have been truly horrible. But the waves, especially from the southwest and the west, probably wouldn't have been quite as steep if you were right in open waters.
We had a relief lifeboat in station at Corkmansherry at the time, and she had no side doors on her. Most of the waves were just flowing in one side and out the other, out the cockpit in the lifeboat. So that was a bit uncomfortable.
Wow. And as a result, I mean, the lifeboats have changed significantly, but were changes made as a result of the lessons experienced in 79?
Well, I suppose the lifeboats got more modern, they got faster, they got more comfortable. That was going to be a natural progression anyway, whether it was a Fastnet race or not. But like some of the modern lifeboats now, and the difference to what we had, we say with the Watsons. Watson's maximum speed 8.5 knots. You have the Aaron class, which came on afterwards, doing 25 knots, and everybody sitting in a nice heated wheelhouse. It was a big difference. The old lifeboats, you were more kind of one with nature, and it was more uncomfortable.
That's a very polite way of saying exposed, isn't it? And I don't know whether 25 knots in that kind of sea state would have been that tolerable, I think.
Well, I tell you now, when we had the Penley disaster now, the one of the boats, I think from Falmouth, went up to Land's End, and the conditions were horrific, and she was making kind of speed over the ground about 17 knots, in them conditions, so they can plow on,
Wow. Well, we're very grateful they can, that's for sure. Francis, have you, after that disaster, I mean, at such a young age as well, with your brother, I'm guessing you got back on a boat, and yes. I'm presuming here, but like how was that transition? Because that experience must have stayed for a long time.
Well, to be honest, we actually sailed the boat back from Ireland 3 or 4 days later, having sort of repaired everything with gaffer tape or whatever we could. We had one guy who injured his leg quite badly, but even he came back on the boat. 2 of the chaps who were married with children, they flew home straight away. Their wives said no way. But we sailed her back, and my parents came out in their boat, and various other boats came out to greet us as we came through the Needles. And I'm very glad I did that, because the following year, with my father and my brother, same brother, we sailed across the Atlantic. And when we were crossing the Bay of Biscay, on our way down to the Canaries to set off to Barbados, we had another storm in the Bay of Biscay. So that would be basically the following winter. No, it was winter 1980. So November at time. No, it was October. Crossing the Bay of Biscay, big storm blows up. It's my turn to go on watch. And I just said to my father, I said, I'm going to funk this. I simply cannot go up on deck. And for the first time in his life, he said, yeah, okay, you don't have to. And so I did carry on sailing, and I married a man, and we sailed together for many years until his job took us abroad, and we were so far from the sea that we gave it up.
Well, that's really good to hear that you kind of got back on the horse. I can't believe a few days later you sailed the same boat back again.
That was extraordinary, but it was very cathartic.
Yeah, I'm guessing you checked the bilges regularly on the trip back.
Yes.
And we're talking, Richard, about safety procedures for the cruise and the planning, but actually the recommendations and the certain levels that the boats have got to get to have changed as a result. As Francis Reincke was saying, that their lockers were actually filling the bilges.
Yes. So many changes with vessels, from stability requirements and so on. Some natural progressions. The fleet generally, the size of boats on average has gotten bigger. And that in itself actually has a safety element. What was interesting in the investigation, they found that, putting it bluntly, smaller boats were more likely to be knocked down. Larger boats were not. A huge proportion of the boats in the fleet experienced knockdowns, some of them multiple knockdowns. And essentially, the larger the boat, the less likely that it was going to experience a knockdown. But yes, I mean, stability requirements, construction requirements, simple things like the fact that washboards to the companionway need to be able to be secured in place, and access to that securing mechanism, accessed both from inside the cabin and from outside in the cockpit. That is a direct knock on from the learnings of the 79 Fastnet. That proved to be a game changer. So many things, and as I said earlier, the checking of vessels as well, rather than a sort of as just purely a self-declaration. Race organisers having safety inspections as part of that pre-race process.
Yeah, and we're learning, obviously digital technology, it's great. We talk about AIS units, we talk about DSC calling on VHFs. Mark, I've got to ask, I'm super guilty of this, but you go out the Solent on a big race, there's 400 boats and it's a bit windy and some of the equipment's going in the water. There's alarms going off on the VHF all the time, and it's really, really distracting and annoying. Although technically you have a navigator and they do a listening watch and they're listening to what's going on. Now there's so much noise, it's very easy to just press clear because it's not your boat, you're not worried. With the RNLI, they must hear a lot of this noise, and depicting what's just something that's lost overboard and what's actually an emergency is quite tricky.
Well, if you heard an alarm on the VHF DSC, you do get a message afterwards from the Coast Guard. We say an update of what the alarm would be. But you do have to, as you say, listen to them all, and to make sure that it's not, first of all, it's not in your area, and secondly, that it's not somebody in. It could be something mediocre, really, But yeah, I do understand where you're coming from when you say, there is a lot of DSC calls now. Yeah, alarms going off. Yeah.
Yeah, I've had to make that call where I've looked around my cockpit and I've gone, oh, that's not there anymore. I think I may have lost that in a wave and had to report. There's a horseshoe with my name on it, but it's all okay. Yeah. It's just lost equipment, which is not a good thing. Yeah. Simon, you sailed around the world. You've seen the weather. You've experienced all of this. What's your kind of biggest lessons learned? That you're quite proud of that we see today, and also what you think we could do better as sailors?
I think people are paying a lot more attention to forecasts, which is a good thing. I think people are also more aware, actually, especially people who do a lot of sailing, that forecasts can change. And so they, if you, I think if you're a skipper, especially, you need to be playing the what if game. So, and by that I mean, if the front comes in a bit sooner, what happens? If I don't make it past the headland before the wind changes, what do I do? Do I go inshore or offshore? That sort of thing. So I think that side of things has got better. Weather forecasting has definitely got better. Things that we could probably carry on or get better with. I think it's if you have people who you go sailing with who aren't very experienced. I think to a certain extent people aren't as happy to make people do just basic drills to start with. This is maybe going to sound really silly, but if you're going sailing with a bunch of friends and you know that half of them have never stepped on a boat before, it's probably worthwhile just doing one man overboard drill, which people may give you huge amounts of grief for, but I think it's worthwhile. There's a great feeling that you can go to sea and you can have an adventure because everyone does and it's safe. Most of the time it is, but it's only safe if you prepare for it.
But do you not think that seasickness plays a big part in bad decision making?
Yes, almost certainly. Yeah, completely. If you go to sea and everyone on board seasick, then probably you should be thinking that maybe I should not be here.
Yeah,
You must shake your head at some of the call outs you've had, Mark, where it's just a fundamental mistake that, as you say, maybe dehydration, tiredness, seasickness has caused that was completely avoidable.
We actually went to the assistance of a yacht sailing up from Land's End, and they had been in some horrendous storms. I think they were at sea for kind of 25, 30 hours. And the people on board were just totally and utterly exhausted. They were just bait, like, and that can happen. And yeah, we told them back into the back to Kinsale actually the same evening, but they were fine afterwards. But they were telling me that they'd just trying to deal with the conditions and seasickness and everything. They were just
and it can catch even the most seasoned sailor.
They were delighted to see the lifeboat.
I always say at sea, orange is my favourite colour.
All right.
But I hope never to see you. Richard, lessons learned. There's a big emphasis on every 3 years doing a sea survival. A certain number of the crew need to have the valid sea survival certificate. You sailed around the world, you've been there, you're now kind of issuing out or helping refine the training and qualifications. What's your big takeaway from the lessons learned and where we are today and what you hope continues?
Yep. I think that training's obviously really important. I would say that given what I do, but and that will continue to be refined and we'll continue to build in further lessons learned as the years go on. But I think that Simon hit on a really crucial point, and that is in the example he gave, man overboards. And it's interesting. We obviously play the same what if game. Simon plays it with weather. My view is that skippers and crews should be playing the what if game with every single element of the boat and the environment they're in. What if the steering fails now? What if my port side shroud pops now while I'm on a port tack? What if the halyard goes? What if someone goes over the side? What if I have a fire on board? And it's not about doom and gloom. It's about thinking through and potentially drilling, practicing what you're going to do if and when those things go wrong. Because the one thing that's guaranteed on a boat is nothing's guaranteed. You have to expect the unexpected. And you know that it's going to go wrong at 2:00 in the morning on a dark, stormy night. And so the more you've pre-thought that through and at least considered potential options, the easier it's going to be for you to deal with that if the time comes. Hopefully it doesn't, but if it does, you and your crew are better prepared for it. So that would be my takeaway, that skippers and crews would be well served to continually challenge themselves on thinking what could go wrong at any given time, being really creative and almost ridiculous about it, because that's what can go wrong, and trying to dream up some workable solutions as to how they deal with it.
I like that. I think, yeah, the what if game changes as well. Every boat you sail on is slightly different, I guess, but yours might be a little more extreme than mine. I'm like, what if we run out of chocolate biscuits?
Very important.
That is a serious
very
crisis.
important.
And Francis, you went on to do a lot more mile sailing, which is great. You didn't lose your passion. But for somebody listening to think, wow, I think that would have scared me silly. You always think it's not going to happen to you. And Mark, you must hear that several times. You have shouts of all different levels. It never happens on a sunny, lovely blue sky day, I'm guessing. It's always the stormy, scary weather in the middle of the night.
Seems to always happen at night anyway, in the dark, and and yeah, look, on a boat, you can really prepare your vessel really well, and all your crew are really, really trained, and you still can't, sometimes, things happen that nobody can really, really forecast, and yeah, that's part of sailing, and it's part of the boating world,
And I guess it's the bit that keeps us all excited. But Simon, apart from number one basic rule from you is always mark one eyeball, look outside. What other top tip would you give somebody who's thinking, right, in 2 years' time, I want to do the Fastnet. It's on my bucket list. I'm going to make it happen.
Okay, well, from a weather point of view, get a barometer that you can trust. Don't tap it and keep looking at it and record it.
Hold on, talk to me about don't tap it, because everybody taps a barometer.
Yeah, well, if you've got a barometer which is a standard ship's one, which is, well, I'll put it on the wall there, which is basically a partial vacuum chamber with a mechanical linkage to a needle. If you tap it, you just enter a random error. So yeah, your needle will move, but it's still going to be rubbish. So just leave it. Now, if you have an old-fashioned one, like it's on the wall at Dartmouth, which is actually a mercury one that has a bubble in it, you can tap that to get it up. But I very much doubt you got one of those. No, so if you don't tap it, then it'll still read wrong, but we don't care. All we care about is the change every hour, and that will be correct. So yeah, pay attention to your barometer and pay attention to what you're seeing and what you're feeling and what you're experiencing compared to what the forecast was, because from a weather forecasting point of view, modern forecasting is a whole lot more reliable. The what of the forecast normally happens. It's the when of the forecast that may be a few hours later or a few hours sooner. But if you look at the forecast and you think, okay, I've got a front coming in, great. What does that mean in what I'm seeing and what I'm experiencing? Then that will allow you to actually monitor the actual weather and how it's changing in line with the forecast, and you'll be able to plan your day and execute your day much better that way. That's my top tip from a weather point of view, preparing for an event like this.
Nice. And Richard, with training and courses, it's, you could do all sorts, but if you wanted to do your first Fastnet race in 2 years' time, what are you going to suggest they do?
Get your sea survival course done and world sailing offshore heavy weather course done. Get it done as early as you can. So don't wait till the week before the race. Get it done as soon as you can, so you've then got the opportunity to put those learnings into practice on the boat. Try and get some other training under your belt. So things like navigation. Have a basic understanding of navigation. You'll enjoy the event a lot more because you'll understand what's going on. But B, you can contribute not just navigationally but safety wise as well. And then I think the final thing I would say is get as much time on the boat and with the crew and skipper as you possibly can, and get as involved as you can in all aspects of the boat, the training, the racing, so that you're as comfortable in that environment as possible. You know where things are, you know how they all work, and you'll enjoy it a lot more, but you'll feel a lot more comfortable and confident in what you're doing as well, and by definition will be safer as a result of it.
Nice, good advice there. And Francis, if anybody wants to hear the horror stories, they should look you up, right?
Yes, okay. Actually, I wrote it all, my brother and I wrote it all up in a book. And I don't know who, but somebody's put it on the internet. So if you just Google Autonomy, which was the name of the boat, and my name, which was my maiden name, which is Francis Power, POWER. You will find it all on the internet, as you can find everything on the internet.
Oh, I think I quite like the first-hand accounts, just to, lessons learned, or imagine being in there, because we hope we never have to experience that, and we hope we never have to see our colourful orange boats with our RNLI crew on board. But Mark, we're very grateful for the work you do, and we hope that you don't have all the calls, because they're going to learn from the weather, they're going to do their courses, and they're going to have positive experiences on the water. I just want to say thank you to everybody for your time today, and reliving the disaster for you, Francis, and reflecting on the lessons learned. And Mark, you went out in those conditions, fearlessly putting your life at risk to save others, and that's what the RNLI does. So we're very grateful to you and those that continue that work. Thank you for listening, and join me next week when I'll be talking to pioneer and ocean advocate Emily Penn about her incredible career.